Hi there. Welcome back to the Wellbeing Designers podcast. I am your host, 𝙒𝙤𝙧𝙡𝙗. On this podcast, I dive into conversations with well-being leaders from across the globe. These individuals might hold positions like head of well-being in large organizations. We have had guests on the show as well who are driving global change in this area and creating international forums to exchange on the topic of well-being. What unites them all? They want to make the world a better place through focusing on well-being. They might be the ones who are responsible for the well-being of hundreds, thousands, or 10,000s of individuals. They might be the catalysts to keep decision makers, CEOs engaged in this conversation about well-being. And they might be the ones who are proving that employee well-being is not just a nice to have, but it's truly a strategic enabler of sustainable performance and business success. I call these people well-being designers. They are the connectors bridging the gap between well-being leaders across companies and countries. So sit back, relax, and enjoy listening to these incredible individuals and learning from them. Remember, we can shape the future of work together, which is truly human-centric and prioritize well-being like never before. Our guest today is Sarah Cunningham, who is the managing director of the World Wellbeing Movement and host of the Working on Wellbeing podcast series, where she engages in meaningful conversations with the world's leading wellbeing experts. Host with the University of Oxford's Wellbeing Research Centre at Harris Manchester College, the World Wellbeing Movement's aim is to improve the quality of life of people across the world by putting well-being at the heart of decision-making in both business and public policy. Sarah's own expertise, which bridges both the corporate and academic worlds, strongly aligns with the World Wellbeing Movement's approach. She is a senior business leader, workplace well-being expert, and future of work strategist with over 20 years experience gained in companies including Accenture, Google, and MasterCard. Hi, Sarah. Very warm welcome today on the Wellbeing Designers podcast.
Thank you so much, Rika, and it's really such an honor to be invited on, so thank you.
You lead the World Wellbeing Movement, a registered charity based at the Oxford University. And for those who haven't come across it yet, can you tell us briefly what the World Wellbeing Movement is about and what is its mission and what excites you the most about this work?
Oh, thank you. Well, when I think about the World Wellbeing Movement, I think of us as being an impact-driven organization. So we're focused on taking the best academic research, looking at how to improve people's well-being. That could be in the workplace, that could be through public policy, but then actually translating that research into action by getting it into the hands of the people who can roll out changes, whether that be politicians or business leaders. We are a charity. We're a registered charity in England and Wales, and we are housed within the Wellbeing Research Centre at the University of Oxford. So our mission, you asked about the mission, our mission is to put well-being at the heart of decision-making, both in business and public policy. There are two co-founders for the World Wellbeing Movement, both of whom have very kindly put their faith in me. All of our listeners, I think, will probably be quite familiar with because they're just visionaries. Professor Lord Richard Layard, who's written many, many books, is one of the co-founders. The other co-founder, who's also recently published a really excellent book, his second book, Professor Jan-Emmanuel Denève, and heavily focused on workplace well-being. He also, of course, has an expertise in well-being public policy as well. And Richard, has done incredible things for wellbeing public policy. So yeah, really what we're trying to do is bridge that gap between all of this brilliant academic research that exists on how we can improve our well-being and the well-being of others and turn that into real world impact. I do want to pick up on something because there's many different ways we do that. And one of them is there's a limited series podcast as well that I host. But it's funny because it's much easier being the person asking the questions, and I'm definitely a little bit more nervous being on this side of the podcast table and answering the questions.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you accepted this challenge, being in the hot seat now yourself. And I feel also very privileged that I can be the one asking questions from you. So everything is so exciting that you told about the World Wellbeing Movement and music for my ears. And let's continue that a bit later and get back to you as a person. I always like to start the podcast with the person. Who are you beyond your bio? What the listeners already heard at the beginning. So how did you get into this position working in well-being?
It's such a great question. And really, when I look back at my career, I moved into this role very much mid-career in my sort of mid-40s. But in a way, it's a bit of a life circle because my interest in wellbeing science stems right back to my 20s and even probably further back to my teens. So career-wise, I spent most of my career in the corporate world. I started out in call centers whilst I was studying for my undergraduate degree in the late 1990s. And then I moved into management consultancy. So my last role prior to this was I was leading MasterCard's Dublin Technology Hub. And I think it was a really great company to work for, and I really enjoyed that stage of my career. And I think it was really during that stage of my career where, in some ways, my professional expertise and my personal interest in psychology, in wellbeing science, really converged. So I had, like many people, I had responsibility and accountability for employee wellbeing during a pandemic. At the time, there were probably about 850 employees in the Dublin office. Now, I was really lucky. I was supported by an incredible team and also incredible global advice and also really, really supportive management as well. That doesn't take away from, how challenging that would be for really anybody. And I know many people listening will have been in that position as well. I took that really, really seriously. And I suppose if I go back to my interest in psychology and wellbeing science, I mentioned that sort of stems back to my late teens, early 20s. It really stems back to my own lived experience. So I would have been in my early 20s when I started suffering from really debilitating panic attacks. And this is something I'm not sure that people who haven't experienced panic attacks actually fully realize what the term means, because the symptoms are very real and they are physiological. So if I go right back to migraines in my teenage years, which then sort of progressed to panic attacks, and I remember my first one, I thought I was having a heart attack. Your heart starts beating really, really fast, pins and needles in my hand, pins and needles in my face, and then started to hyperventilate, couldn't breathe. I have a memory of a very early panic attack, lying on the tarmac outside a petrol station, breathing into a brown paper bag, just trying to breathe. So when people talk about panic attacks, these are very, very real physiological symptoms. In the 1990s in Ireland, people didn't really talk about mental health. It took me a while to actually figure out that it was panic attacks. And I had to try a few different options sort of for treatment. Now, I was lucky because I got support. And I'm very lucky that I have a very supportive family as well, who I couldn't be more grateful for. I would say to anybody who is listening and anybody who is suffering, I would say, please do go and get support, because professional support is what helped me. And if I hadn't had that professional support, my life story could have been quite different. My family were incredibly supportive. My friends were incredibly supportive. But the real thing that made the ultimate difference was the tools. So if anybody's listening and suffering, please do go and get that support. How did I move into well-being? I suppose your original question. So as I said, I had that sort of corporate career. I was working in MasterCard, where I had many responsibilities, one of which was employee well-being before, during and after the pandemic. And it was around that time that I actually decided to go back and study. So I did a part-time executive master's degree in LSE, in psychological and behavioral science. And through the network that I met through that, I heard that Richard and Jan were founding the World Wellbeing Movement and that they were looking for somebody to lead it. So to suddenly find myself interviewing with them and then being hired and starting the work, and really that's sort of history now. I'm coming up to 3 years at the World Wellbeing Movement and just feeling really proud of what we've managed to achieve in that 3 years.
I talk to many people like you who work, in this field, and most of them have a deep personal story that led them to do this work. And I also meet so many people in the corporate who either went a bit outside to maybe take care of themselves, and then they went back with this energy that now we can do it differently. And that's very exciting about today, that there is this whole movement there. Just elaborating a bit on your story. I am in the beginning of my 40s, and I also shifted a bit towards this, but you did really a mid-career pivot, changing your direction in your 40s. So how did that happen, and what would be your advice for others who have similar feelings and who would like to take a step?
It wasn't a plan. The plan was the master's degree. And it was through the master's degree that, in a way, I was fortuitous. The right opportunity came along at the right time. So I was really lucky. Richard and Jan were looking for somebody who had experience as an organizational leader, who had hands-on experience rolling out employee well-being interventions in the workplace, which obviously I'd done in the role I was in at that time. And they were looking for somebody who understood the academic literature. Education is a privilege. It should be a human right. And I'm aware that I had the privilege that I had the time and I had the financial ability to complete that master's degree. My 2 pieces of advice for anybody who's thinking that they would like to pivot their career. The first one is the importance of continuous education. There are so many ways in which we can continuously learn, whether that be a short online learning course, whether it just be keeping up to speed, listening to podcasts, reading, whether it be trade blogs, academic journal articles, etc. Really just keeping up to speed. That, to me, really is essential for a midlife career pivot. I think the other one is being open. And I think that's probably where I was open to change. So when I first heard about the role, I was living in Ireland. The role was in the UK. I wasn't planning to relocate. And I was happy in the company I worked in. I'm very lucky I have an incredibly supportive husband. And I was sort of talking myself out of applying. And he said, well, why are you doing that? But I think opportunities can come knocking. And if we're not open, we might not open the door to those opportunities.
Well-being is a science. Can you tell more about that?
Yeah, and thank you, because I think that's a really important point. Well-being is a science. It can be measured and it can be improved. How can it be measured? Well, there's brilliant academics who have been studying this, and there are thousands and thousands of papers around this, but the most effective way of measuring well-being is by measuring subjective well-being, i.e. by asking people about their life satisfaction. So typically the question used would be, on a scale of 0 to 10, how satisfied are you with your life nowadays? That responses to that question have been studied by some of the leading academics in wellbeing science on the planet, including my colleagues who I'm so proud to work with and learn from. And the way in which people answer that question is predictive of all the various drivers of our well-being. So whether that be physical health, mental health, longevity, and all sorts of employment status, etc., etc. Now the data is there, the evidence is there. Really, every country, every government in the world should be measuring population well-being and should be aiming to improve population well-being. The UK government have been measuring population well-being since about 2011. And that's through the Office for National Statistics. And in fact, they ask 4 questions. So they ask that life satisfaction question, which we call evaluative well-being. They ask about happiness, which is sort of positive emotion, positive affect, stress, which is negative emotion or negative affect, and sense of purpose, which Aristotle would have coined eudaimonic well-being. That's really important. Not every country measures population well-being. And if you don't measure it, you don't have a baseline to improve from. So one of the things that we advocate for at the World Wellbeing Movement is that the well-being of people should be the overarching goal of governments across the world. GDP, gross domestic product, or economic progress, has actually been proven to be a flawed measure of societal progress. In fact, the person who invented GDP famously said, whatever you do, don't use this to measure societal progress. And yet here we are. So again, there's loads of evidence that when their quality of life, when their life satisfaction is improved, they are more productive. And so we see sort of everything else follows. So this is something that we're really advocating for. Number 1, governments across the world should measure population well-being. And number 2, they should act on that. And they should look at every single policy through a well-being lens. And, you know, if we think about the past 20 years ago, not that many governments were looking at policies through a green lens, but now, of course, they need to. They need to look at every government policy through a green lens, an environment lens. So what we're advocating for is, well, you should also be looking at every single policy through a well-being lens. Both are as important as each other, because if we want well-being for both present and future generations, we need to be using both of those lenses.
What about workplace well-being? Because you do a lot of work to put well-being to the strategic agenda of workplaces, big organizations.
Yeah, well, as you say, it's sort of half of our mission. We're focused on putting well-being at the heart of decision-making in business and public policy. On the business side, when it comes to workplace well-being, really there's 4 things that we're really focused on doing. And the first one is sharing the business case for improving employee well-being. So my colleagues at our academic partner, the Wellbeing Research Centre at the University of Oxford, have done some absolutely incredible research into the business case for improving employee well-being. And actually, I highly recommend a new book by my colleagues, Professor Jan-Emmanuel Denève and Dr. George Ward, Why Workplace Wellbeing Matters.
I am reading it.
You read it? Yeah, no, it's incredible. And of course, there's many, many other brilliant academics across the world also doing incredible work here. But just at a really top level, you know, well-being should be as foundational to any organization as the overall organization strategy. Because the research shows us that if you can improve employee well-being, you can improve all of the metrics that matter to chief financial officers and chief executive officers. You can improve productivity. You can improve talent attraction, talent retention, reduce absenteeism, and critically, you can improve financial and stock market returns. So really, really fascinating high-end academic research on that business case outlined in the book. And I think one of the first things we've done over the past 3 years is sharing that, because we want to share that as widely as possible. And the reason we want to share it is because we hear time and time again, people who are working in organizations where their role is somehow related to employee well-being are telling us, my team is too small, I'm not getting budget approval to extend my team, I'm not getting budget approval to roll out interventions. So by sharing the business case, by sharing the business imperative, we're outlining why every C-suite exec should care about this. So that's sort of the first thing we do. The second thing we do will come as no surprise, and that is to really motivate employers right across the world to measure employee well-being. So we have published guidelines and recommendations on how to measure employee well-being, but we always say you cannot manage what you don't measure. So how on earth do you know what problem you're solving for if you're not measuring employee well-being and doing root cause analysis to understand the drivers of employee well-being? The third thing we do is we share evidence-based insights on how to improve employee well-being. And that's really key. Everything we share is grounded in robust academic insight. So you may have seen one of our key publications is the Work Wellbeing Playbook. We did a large-scale systematic literature review with nearly 3,000 academic papers. We then whittled those down to look for the highest quality papers. We categorized those by 12 drivers of employee well-being. And then we published it in a really concise guide that is aimed at busy business leaders, because we recognize that actually business leaders are busier than ever and they might not have the time to read those heavy academic papers. So we stripped out the linear regression. We shared the overall guidance. But I think what's really key, and I always say this, is there is no one secret and there is no magic formula. And so there is evidence, but you're never going to find one intervention. So what organizations really need to do is measure and then take a holistic approach. Additionally, they cannot rely just on individual level interventions. And one of my brilliant colleagues, Dr. William Fleming, has done research which really shows that individual level interventions alone, including relaxation-based apps and classes, they simply are not powerful enough in isolation to improve employee well-being. So organizations need to take a holistic approach. Interventions need to be a combination of organizational level, group level, and individual level. And that's what we're trying to include in the playbook. I mentioned it's a science. Science is always evolving. So that is just version 1 of the playbook. There will be more iterations to follow. We are working on the version 2 because the science is evolving and it doesn't stand still. We don't have all the answers. Nobody has all the answers. Very quickly, I suppose the final thing that we're also doing is aiming to influence work well-being policy, because I think this is something that I feel very strongly about. In the country I'm from, there was a marriage bar that was lifted 4 years before I was born that prevented women, upon getting married, from working in the public sector, but that was typically extended to the private sector. So first of all, removing that piece of regulation has impacted my life and the life of my peers. Obviously, more recently, gender pay equality, regulation, etc. So I feel very strongly about the important role that regulation has to play as well in really catalyzing employers to, first of all, measure employee well-being, but also to take action. We provide guidance very much rooted in academic evidence.
One of my mantras is fall in love with the problem, not with the solution, right? And in order to define the problem, we need to measure ideally. And I think it's so important nowadays because it's great that there is so much energy out there for well-being, but of course there is also big noise out there. So different providers offering, all the solutions that will solve your problem. But what is your problem, right? It might be the best solution, but not solving really your problem. The playbook. I love the approach that you and the team with Jan Emanuel really broke down and differentiated, the drivers, well-being itself, and the outcome. So that makes it much easier to grab this topic somewhere, because it can be very broad. As you dig deeper, then you realize that, wow, there is a real depth in this.
There is. And I actually want to take a moment to really call out the team. I was a co-author on it, but with an incredible team. So we've already mentioned 2 of the co-authors, Professor Jan Emanuel Deneve, Dr. William Fleming, and also Dr. George Ward. There was also Dr. Mika Katz, and a huge shout out to Cherise Regier. One of the things which is so important as a driver of our wellbeing at work is appreciation and recognition. So I do want to take a moment to thank the team who worked on that. And while I'm at it, maybe I could take a moment to thank the wider team as well at the World Wellbeing Movement, because I couldn't be luckier to work with the most incredible team. Our brilliant marketing officer, Charlotte Day, supported by our fractional head of marketing and comms, Jonathan Whitney. That is the dream team who works on that. And also Harriet Goss, who supports me as EA and office manager. And then we've recently hired our first head of policy and public affairs, 𝗵𝗿.
Going back a bit to the measurement, it's on the top of mind for everyone. What would be, your advice on measurement concretely for well-being leaders or business leaders? Because there is the research out there which really shows clear correlation between the well-being index of companies and their stock market performance. It's where to start, how to define the problem.
Yeah, and thank you. And I love that you're asking about defining the problem, because we recommend measuring not only how employees are feeling, but also why they're feeling that way. And it's really interesting because when I talk to people with different career roles, for instance, I gave a talk recently to a group of cybersecurity experts, and I said, you're experts at root cause analysis. So you're experts at figuring out why are these cyber attacks happening and how do we prevent them? And that's what we need to do as well when it comes to employee well-being. So it's not just measuring employee well-being, though that is, as a baseline, really important. It's also measuring all the drivers. So let me step back. How do we measure employee well-being? Well, I talked about how to measure well-being in the general population. We recommend 4 questions: job satisfaction, happiness at work, stress at work, and sense of purpose at work. So combined, these questions will provide us with a holistic overview of how people feel about the work they do. Now, for the exact wording of those questions, you can find that on all sorts of resources on our website and also in the book I mentioned earlier as well. But those questions mirror questions used by the UK's Office for National Statistics and the OECD to measure well-being in the general population. And those questions are also used in the world's largest study of employee well-being, which is run by the recruitment company Indeed, who are also a founding member of the World Wellbeing Movement. So that's going to tell you how people are feeling. It's not going to tell you anything about why they're feeling that way. And to figure out why people are feeling as they're feeling, we recommend measuring the drivers of our well-being at work. I'm sure everybody listening can think of different drivers of your well-being at work. And of course, we're all different. We are diverse. So different drivers will impact different people more or less. But we recommend measuring 12 key drivers of employee well-being. So pay and conditions, flexibility, whether you have a sense of belonging, whether you are appreciated, whether you're recognized for the work that you're doing, whether you're energized by the work that you're doing, whether you have scope to learn and grow, manager support, whether you feel trust in your management and you feel trusted, and vice versa. So you can find all of the drivers that we recommend measuring, again, on various resources on our website, and particularly in the Work Wellbeing Playbook, where we lay this out. So what we recommend organizations do is measure both how employees are feeling and why they're feeling that way, so all of those drivers, and then conduct driver analysis to identify the poorest performing drivers at your organization. Now, you could do that at a more granular level, because what you will probably find is the poorest performing drivers in perhaps your Pune office might be different to the poorest performing drivers in your San Francisco office, which might differ to your Paris office. So the reality is that the more you can do that at a granular level, the better, though, of course, always anonymizing and aggregating any of that data. That's going to help you to figure out where to start. Because in a way, the question is, well, where do we start? You start with measurement. You do need to take a holistic approach. But if you're looking through the Work Wellbeing Playbook and you're going, gosh, well, this is categorized by 12 drivers, we can't roll out all of these interventions. Look at where you're performing most poorly. So maybe if your results are showing you that people in your organization are not feeling that sense of trust, maybe you should be looking at rolling out interventions aimed at improving psychological safety. So psychological safety is defined as feeling free to voice your ideas and also to voice your critique, which is so important, without fear of recrimination. And there are many interventions at organizational level, group level, and individual level that can help to improve psychological safety. If you are looking at your driver analysis and it's telling you that actually people's sense of purpose is quite low, that's not performing so well. Well, again, there's many interventions, again, at organizational level, group level, and individual level that are evidence-based that can be rolled out. And actually, we find that, taking a strength-based approach, that particular intervention really seems to have quite a powerful effect when it comes to supporting sense of purpose. Job crafting is another intervention that really, really supports that sense of purpose. And also, fully paid volunteer days. That is really, really helpful. And of course, effective onboarding, people manager training, etc. So the playbook is packed full of interventions. Context matters. So that is important to remember. But we recommend measure those drivers, pinpoint your poorest performing drivers and start there. But don't just rely on individual level interventions. They do have their place, but you've got to take a holistic approach.
What I would add as I was listening to you, that it's also good to have this analysis to know what is going well, because sometimes we start with the problem. Like when I work with the teams on this, I also start to first recognize there are also always things which are going well, right? That we can see that from this data, and that also can give us energy. Okay, so this is what we do well, so how to build on that, and then also bring those other less good data on this level.
And Rika, thank you for making such an excellent point. I couldn't agree more. And it makes me think about another piece of advice, which is so key. Data is important. It's really important to look at data so that you have statistically significant evidence and insights, but it doesn't always give you all the answers. So I highly recommend that any business leader follow that up with qualitative research.
What are you the most proud of during your time with the World Wellbeing Movement?
I'm really proud that we as a team have been able to launch and move from startup to registered charity to publishing freely available resources that really help people. Thousands of business leaders have downloaded the Work Wellbeing Playbook, and given it is a fairly niche audience, that tells us it's really being used, and we're getting all of this incredible feedback back, to the extent that we've had people who are in head of wellbeing roles saying that they were struggling so much that they were actually thinking of leaving until they got access to this playbook, and it gave them help with crafting their strategy. It doesn't give you a strategy, it gives you a framework. And I think that's the important thing to say. And people in that sort of head of wellbeing role is to craft a holistic strategy, and it's to learn from resources like this. Ideally, I would love to see more field research happening. So we'd love to see organizations doing before and after studies, A/B tests, even some gold standard randomized controlled trials. But I think as an organization, those are probably the things we're proudest of. I'm incredibly proud of the team. We are a scaling charity. We are reliant on the funding we receive as a charity. And really what we've been able to achieve as a small team, in some ways we're sort of punching above our weight.
Yeah. Wow, so much energy in your words. And still, I was so curious on the other side. So what is your biggest failure, or what you feel that next time I would do it differently and you could advise others to do it differently?
Oh, it's such a tough question. I am somebody with a history of anxiety, and I live with anxiety. And I think the times when I have not been at my best are the times when I have made a decision from a place of fear. It's something I'm trying not to do as much. I'm trying to make decisions from a place of courage, but I'd be lying if I say I achieve that all the time. So instead of calling it a failure, I'm going to call it an area for development, is trying not to make decisions from a place of fear and trying not to let fear and anxiety rule. So definitely improving, but there's still scope. So I think that's, if I'm completely honest.
Mm-hmm. I am not completely okay with the word failure because, of course, we can have a failure culture, so to encourage people to try out things, but I also have a growth mindset. Then failure is a point where you can grow from, right? It's a developmental opportunity as well. Yeah. Very last question. What would be then, based on all this, your number 1 or 2 advice for well-being leaders out there? How can they crack the code on workplace well-being?
Well, first of all, unfortunately, there is no code. There isn't even a magical formula, and there's certainly no secret, but there is a framework, and there are evidence-based insights that we can learn from. First of all, what I always say is take a holistic approach, but I get the impression that you're asking more on an individual level to people who are in that role. And one of the things I'm seeing is that it can be quite a lonely role, actually, because particularly in maybe medium-sized organizations, often there might be just one person who has responsibility and accountability for employee well-being for the entire organization. And that's a huge burden. And I suppose my answer would be, remember that you're actually not alone. So even if you're the only person in your organization with that responsibility, there will be a community out there. So seek the community. I've learned so much from the community. And again, I mentioned World Wellbeing Movement is a movement. We are a movement. We also have an advisory council made up of chief wellbeing officers, heads of wellbeing from an incredible array of organizations who I get to learn so much from. So I think the best advice I can give is, if you're lacking the community within your organization, seek the community outside of your organization, because the community does exist and we learn from each other.
That's a great advice. And also goes back to the notion of belonging, because also being leaders, they should have this feeling, right, in a broader context outside of the organization, that you belong to this community of like-minded people. Beautiful conversation. Thank you so much, Sarah. And I am so happy. I couldn't be happier that this conversation happened today with you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rika. And thank you for all the incredible work that you've been doing. I've really enjoyed getting to know you. And yes, absolutely. Let's continue collaborating and learning from each other. So this is only the start of our conversations.
Wishing you a very nice day, and see you soon.
Oh, thank you.
Don't forget to keep up with us on all major podcast channels, including YouTube, Spotify, or Apple. Hit that subscribe button to express your support and be notified about the latest release of the podcast. You can also connect with us on social media. We are there on LinkedIn and Instagram. Search for Wellbeing Designers. And you can also ask directly questions from me, or just say hi via my email address, hello@𝙒𝙤𝙧𝙡, REKADEAK.com. You can also visit our website, www.wellbeing.design, or my personal website, www.𝙒𝙤𝙧𝙡.com. Together, let's continue shaping the future of work, which is truly human-centric and prioritizes well-being like never before. Thanks for tuning in. Until the next time, take care and be well.